And so I'm not going to be able to see the chat. And so I'll just ask you to interrupt me if you feel like doing so with anything in the chat. And otherwise, I've got about 15 minutes that I should speak. Okay, don't hesitate, Deb or Eliana, to step in and interrupt me if you need to at any point if I'm going close to time. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's lovely to be here with you all, and what an inspiring group of presenters so far. My goodness, I've learned so much. I'm very excited for attending this full day of sessions. So thank you to everyone who's already shared and who plans to. Thank you to Deb and Eliana for organizing such a fantastic event. I'm joining you from the northwest coast of in Canada, in Victoria, BC, on the Lekwungen lands of what's known as the nations of the Esquimalt and Songhees Nations ancestral land. I'm here to speak today about a course that was for about 100. I'm going to just let's see if I can change my slides. There we go. I'm going to focus in specifically on one assignment, which was a creative assignment, or an assignment where there was creative options for students. However, I'm going to put it in the context of the course because that's very important, of course, giving you a little bit of details about how we went about not only the assessments in this course, but also the pedagogical approach, which were quite distinct. And then explain to you some of the feedbacks and observations we've made about this. So this was for a large course class, and not nearly as large as some of you presented on. This was for about 100 students per semester, but it did run every semester. I was part of the initial design of this course and taught and oversaw this course for a couple of years at a large Canadian university. And one important piece of context for those of you who are not Canadian is that in the context of Canada, in 2015, there was a Truth and Reconciliation Commission that reported on the genocide of Indigenous peoples in Canada. And there was key calls for action that came out of this, which included for the post-secondary sector, as education was a key modality through which colonial Canada was established. And it continues to be legacies today of that. So this was really within the Department of Sociology. This was seen as an important way of decolonizing some of the diversity in the program. So the design was a result of a collaboration that happened between Indigenous and non-Indigenous faculty. And there was a central focus on what it might mean to decolonize the course overall, and a focus as well, as mentioned, on the education system itself. So there was a need for us to come at this course pedagogically and also in terms of assessments from that standpoint of what could it look like to decolonize our approaches, or to offer alternative approaches which might help us actually with the content of the course as well. So the student body was very diverse. And another feature was that there were extremely different levels of knowledge coming in. There were Indigenous and non-Indigenous students in here, as well as a huge variety of students with different backgrounds. And I'll say a little bit more later, but as we noted as we went through, it was a first-year course, but increasingly as the course gained in popularity within the university, we were having students come from all ages and also levels within their degree. So this was an elective, and it was delivered both in person and online because of the development of it just pre-COVID and through COVID. So there's a few points I'm just going to briefly touch on that were the key considerations for us, key principles. And I'll just dive into those due to shortage of time here. So the first of these is that's concept from El-Khoury, the Brazilian sociologist, that the traditional and colonial model of education is a banking model of education, where the teacher has the knowledge and holds the knowledge and deposits this into the student. Therefore, the assessment process would be for the student to be able to reproduce that same knowledge. So that was an important starting point for us to challenge, because instead what we were trying to come at this with was a standpoint of critical pedagogy, where the idea is that knowledge is always relationally co-created. So while there may be certain there's certain facts and information that students were certainly expected to be able to demonstrate knowledge of, the most critical component of this course and many of the sociology courses I've been involved in is demonstrating the capacity for sociological analysis. through the distinct lenses, theories, approaches that are introduced as content in the course. So students' demonstration of their capacity to apply these analytic capacities was key to the course. So the other principle that was important for us was this concept of sympagogy, which is that knowledge is not held by some individuals and not by others, but that all beings have knowledge, and that the process of generating knowledge is always a relational practice that happens with one another and also with the world. And this is a key principle from Indigenous philosophy and theories, which is that we don't just learn from other people or with other people, but also from the earth, from the land, from the broader ecosystem. And so this concept, one of my Mohawk colleagues says nature is the original classroom. So according to Indigenous ways of being and knowing and knowledge systems, this was a really important principle we had to think about as well. Also, the principle of consent was central for us. So the Anishinaabe scholar Leanne Simpson talks about how post-secondary education consent can often be coercive. So there's not a whole lot of choice given in how students are asked to reproduce or demonstrate their knowledge or be assessed. And so that was also a very important thing, as well as in the design. So consent in terms of what they're learning. So there was an element in this course design where we had case studies and we allowed the students to select and identify case studies that they wanted to explore as part of the course. And finally, apologies for this not fitting on the screen properly, but the final really important consideration for us in this design was that there's different ways of knowing. And that was based on the idea that there's very different worldviews. One concept we work with was the Mi'kmaq concept of Iktuakmunk, which is the gift of multiple perspectives. And that some of the challenges, especially some of these wicked challenges we face in the field of sociology and try to address in some way, the idea that we need multiple perspectives and multiple ways of coming at them in order to understand them. So key features of the course design included individual reflections around which there was some element of choice with which ones students needed to complete. And then there was a lot of interactive exercises during class. We did this both online and in person. In fact, the in-person format offered some interesting case studies for us to look at because it was a lecture room format. And so it didn't really permit much for that kind of peer-to-peer learning that we were trying to support. So we would talk about how the classroom itself was a model of education, of that banking style of education. And we would disrupt it by still having lots of interactive exercises there. So we included lots of diverse teachers in the classroom. We had weekly small group tutorials. And then finally, what I will be focusing on now is the option to engage in a creative final assignment for students or generate an academic paper. So we didn't remove that possibility for them to produce an academic paper. We simply wanted to add in this option as a point of consent to see what might come of it. And the results were really quite astounding, which I'll be sharing with you. So as mentioned, students were allowed to have an academic style essay. The final assignment, they were to pick one of the topics that we covered in the course, and we gave examples of those, but they could also pick outside of those if it fit. And then they were to explore it either through an academic style essay or a creative exploration. Now, there was key elements for the creative exploration that they had to add. They couldn't just produce, say, a work of art and submit that. And I'll talk about why that was important from the assessment standpoint in a moment. But the creative exploration, we said that they had to also have a written component to it. So that did not have to be as formal or thorough or comprehensive as the academic style essay option. It also didn't need to be as long, but it needed to be able to explain to us what it was they had done, what was this creative process they'd done. It needed to reference course content and the linkages between what they'd done with course content and sources. And with sources for this course, grade literature was fully welcome for many reasons, again, pertaining to the decolonizing of knowledge. They had to explain the process they used, and they had to highlight in particular the insights that they gained through engaging in that process, not just from an analysis of the course content. So it was really using the medium to explore the content and be able to reflect back on what happened. And finally, they had to demonstrate critical analysis through this written product that they would produce with the creative product. Whether they did either the academic essay or the creative exploration, they needed to complete a self-assessment. So we had the same grading rubric across assignments, but there was a self-assessment component which enabled them to demonstrate that they any things that we might not be able to see in those products themselves. So for instance, we were asking them to explain the sort of depth of engagement with materials or materials beyond the course content. And they would have to give themselves a grade in each of the areas of the rubric, but also give us evidence of that or explain what was meant. So that was, again, a way that we tried to support their participation or input into our final assessment of them. So some features of that final assignment were that they were supported to start very early in the term. And most students did. And they were offered instructor or peer supports through that process. And that enabled a lot of developmental components for that process, where that was needed or where that was helpful to them. And the students would select the medium of expression. So I should just mention right now, 90 to 95% of students across all of the semesters chose the creative version of the assignment. And that was one very significant surprise for us. And we would provide a list of possible creative mediums, but the students continually surprised us with about 90 to 95 students per term going through creating a creative product. There weren't two that were the same. They were all very unique. I can give you some examples, but we had everything from sculpture and dance choreography and performance to poetry, photo voice, podcasts, news, journalistic articles, and so on. So we tried not to be prescriptive with what it could be as long as it had a creative element. But the list went longer than this list I'm able to show you here. So why did we pick a creative assignment? For many different reasons. One was because we felt like it was a very effective way to enable different worldviews and ways of knowing to be explored and expressed, which was such a key component of the course. It also disrupted our reliance to working with words and text and rationality that is used in a very particular way within post-secondary sociology departments. We also wanted to support an embodied and connection to experience and lived experience, as what we're talking about in the course is lived today and is felt very deeply by many people. So, you know, Indigenous students in the class whose ancestors had been in residential schools or had been killed, you know, these were very, very sensitive issues. And so we didn't want this to be sort of a rational exercise. We wanted to honor and acknowledge that and give people that space for diversity, expression, and engagement in this, and also to have maximal choice so they could choose how they would like to do this. It's important to just talk about what we graded, because we did not grade, and I really need to emphasize this, the creative elements of the work they did. That was not, we did not believe that was part of our role to judge in their art making. We're sociologists, not artists. And similarly, it was really important to share to them that they didn't need to be artists to be able to engage in this. Any kind of form of creatively engaging was supported. So we were grading the explanatory component by the student. That was the focus of what we were looking at, but it was illustrated through the creative product. And it was amazing how enriching that was to be able to read their words and them referencing different aspects of what they'd done and why they'd done it and what insights it raised for them. And so as mentioned at the beginning, this grading process and the rubric was really focused on how they were integrating these different lenses of analysis and demonstrating their capacity to apply it through whatever medium they chose as related to the topic they chose. So, and then also making reference to the course content. So they were not graded. We decided that actually this was not a course that was focused on academic writing. This was not the purpose of the course. So we decided that we would not, in this case, grade them on the academic writing style within reason. There was a part of the rubric that was focused on effective communication and also making sure to have consistent grammar, style, etc. But it wasn't a heavy emphasis of the process. And then, as mentioned, we included some input from students in the self-assessment process, which sometimes affected it, but more often than not would also support us to give meaningful feedback, but also to have some follow-up conversations with students where there was a big differential in our assessment from their own. It was really interesting to get feedback from students over the several years I was part of teaching this course. And I think for faculty, the most striking and overwhelming a part of this experience, having taught many other courses with many other forms of assessment, was how engaged students were. As students heard about the course, it became the most subscribed to enrolled course, most popular course in the department. And so we had always full enrollment, and students would start very early in terms. So for a September to December term, students were starting in September already on their projects. So there was just a deep level of engagement, and so that's something that we as faculty really noticed. The way that came out from students' feedback was how much they loved it. Some students talked about how they would take a break from studying for other courses by engaging in this project. In this course. So it was a real outlet for them to explore and pursue their interests. But the most important thing that came out from students directly was actually this opportunity for choice and self-expression. This was really the most impactful for the students that gave us evaluative feedback, that this was something that many of them didn't feel like they'd had a chance to do before. And as mentioned, at first, these were mainly first-year students, but by the third year of teaching this, there were a lot of higher levels also coming back to take this course for the reasons of having heard about it. And what we noticed was just a very high level of analysis and insights coming out. And we think this was due to the experiential engagement that this assignment supported for them to do. We found it an incredibly compelling experience as faculty to grade these assignments because they were so insightful. There was such uniqueness of analysis that came through. And so this is also an interesting thing from the standpoint of not just decolonizing assessments, but also in the era of ChatGPT. These were things that students, ChatGPT could not support. We're not saying that there isn't creative ways to use ChatGPT, but it is an interesting element of this as well. And that really we watched just this level of learning and making connections and this level of enthusiasm and passion because they chose to engage through a medium that resonated or felt connected to, or sometimes something they wanted to explore. It also opened up pathways for them in their lives. So some of them shared these outputs publicly. One student published their poem in a poetry journal. We had one student who had come up with some ideas around a movement, actually start a small nonprofit organization. We had another student who published, I'm sorry, I don't know if I mentioned, published a news article. We had a student who shared their art and other successes. We had a couple of Indigenous students in the course who used this opportunity to engage in revitalizing and learning about some traditional practices. One, for example, spent the whole term learning how to make moccasins. Another one engaged in learning how to do traditional sculpture for the first time. So these opened up pathways for them in their lives and important things. And in fact, I still get emails from students from years ago in the course, including one just this week from a student talking about how they're still impacted by the experience in the course. So that was a really overwhelming and interesting aspect of that. I don't know where I am on the time, but I'm going to pause there in case there's an opportunity for discussion or dialogue.
Thanks, Rebecca, so much. One of the things that I was thinking about as I listened is how you exemplified what Jenny and Hung had been talking about in the previous session, this holistic approach to assessment and the alignment of what you do with why you do it. So I'm curious whether you shared with the students what you shared with us. That is your set of assumptions and beliefs about assessment and teaching and learning at the beginning, because what you did was so well grounded. So I'm curious whether in what your set of assumptions and beliefs were. So I'm curious about that. You know, do you see that as essential for instructors to share, professors to share at the beginning of their course, you know, that this is what I believe about assessment and learning, so therefore this is the kind of stuff we're going to do. So did you share that directly? Did you make that obvious to them?
We absolutely did, but we did it in an active learning way. So by that, I mean, we first engaged them in their experiences in learning environments and engaged them in a critical analysis of what was the best learning experience they had, what made it so good. So this is one of the interactive peer-to-peer way to get the group to also be high participation. But we also use things like when we were sitting in the lecture style classroom in person to say, what do you notice about this classroom? What does that tell you about this education model? What do you think? So we drew out their understandings and thoughts about it, and then worked with those to also to present, yes, these are some of the considerations we've put into this. But we absolutely did share that. So as mentioned, we had these key topics we were going to cover, but we said we're going to explore case studies. But we actually had a session, we used something called open space, which is an interactive, again, participatory exercise, to say to the class, to invite them to identify what were the things they wanted to explore in this class. So we did that very early on in the course, and they identified some of the topics, some of the particular case studies that we ended up studying as well. So we just said right up front, this is a co-creating space. And it meant sometimes we pivoted a little bit, but we created space in the schedule to allow for that. So yes, we absolutely did share that, and that level of full transparency was really important, and it brought up lots of issues around dynamics and questions about assignments, and you know, sometimes I think some of the processes we actually ended up adapting with live input from students. So, and we did have I should mention, we did have full departmental support of doing this. It was really an amazing thing to feel so supported in all these like live innovative approaches. Yeah, so absolutely we did. Thank you for that. That's an important piece, I think.
So if you were to take that course and put it online, could you do what you did?
We did do that. We had to do that because it was COVID. COVID happened while we were teaching in person. So we did do that. We adapted and delivered this as full online, as full in person, hybrid. Yeah, and we ended up keeping that hybrid piece moving forward because even past the mandate to return to class, because we knew students sometimes were sick and might want to feel more comfortable staying home. So we just kept a hybrid component actually always going as another element of consent. And we did not find it a problem to engage in the participatory activities in person or online. But I should mention, I have a background in community engaged research and participatory approaches. So there was a lot of tools I used in my community engagement research, like data collection approaches, etc., which are equalizing and disrupt power dynamics or peer-based. So we integrated a whole lot of those in different ways, but adaptations sometimes worked even better online, sometimes they're a bit better in person. So we just kept mixing it up with those approaches. Yeah.
Thank you very much.